We can wait for another 2 minutes because National President and Dr. Jayesh Lele sir both are joining. Sir.
Thank you so much, Anand. We'll wait.
Local laparoscopy. അതുപോലെ തന്നെ ലോക്കൽ തന്ന ലാപ്രോസ്കോപ്പി ഓർമ്മയുണ്ടാ? ഇല്ല സ്പൈനൽ തന്നു സ്പൈനൽ.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
So can we start, sir?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. Good afternoon and welcome to everyone to the webinar of the IMA Standing Committee for Pharmacovigilance. So today is our first public event, and I would like to first share with you the agenda for the session, and then I'm sharing the screen so that you can see that. So first of all, let me start with welcoming all the participants, especially our respected National President Jailal sir and our respected HSD sir, Dr. Jayesh Lele sir. So as I mentioned, first of all, I wish to convey my heartfelt thanks to our respected National President sir and HSD sir for constituting this pharmacovigilance committee, and also for selecting me for this position as chairman. Thank you very much, sir. I would like to start with my heartfelt thanks to you. And today, actually, it is it's a very important day in the history of patient safety because today is International Clinical Trials Day. So this day actually was the day on which James Lind first started the first ever randomized clinical trial on a ship actually, and it was in the year 1747. So that is when any kind of clinical trials was done in the first time in history is recorded. You all know the history of vitamin C and the scurvy, so I would not go into that. So that is the day on which we actually started clinical trials. So why this is important now is because in the context of pharmacovigilance, what is pharmacovigilance? We are actually trying to assess the safety of the medicines that we are using on a day-to-day basis. So what does clinical trial do? A clinical trial actually, the purpose of a clinical trial is to define the effectiveness as well as safety of a product. So ideally, pharmacovigilance starts when the time clinical trial starts, or rather, in other way to put it, clinical trials are done for the purpose of identifying the safety or assessing the safety of a product on an ongoing basis. So it is all the more relevant that we start the first public activity of our IMA Standing Committee for Pharmacovigilance on the World International Clinical Trials Day. And first in man studies are whenever they happen, they are all in clinical trials, and therefore safety monitoring starts there, pharmacovigilance starts there. So therefore today we are also starting our journey in the Pharmacovigilance Standing Committee, for which I want to thank everyone. So I would now take a few minutes to quickly introduce our members. I'm not going to ask them to speak. I will just quickly roll their bios in a CV, and then we will go ahead with our respected national president's address, and they're followed by our respected HSG's address. And then our senior member, Dr. Usha Rani, will introduce our speaker for the day, Dr. Nilima Kshirsagar. And then we will have the talk by Dr. Nilima, and then the QA session, and we will planning to end the session by 6 o'clock. So this is the agenda, sir. And I'm going to the first member. So this is myself. So I'm Dr. Vijay Venkataraman. I'm the chairman for the Standing Committee for Pharmacovigilance. I'm a diabetologist, pharmacovigilance physician, and entrepreneur for with the background of MBA also, and I have been in the field for the past 20 years. And I've been very active in the pharmacovigilance space, and I'm the first Indian to be awarded the fellowship of the Pharmaceutical Information and Pharmacovigilance Association, PIPA UK. And apart from that, I have affiliations with several organizations which are interested in pharmacovigilance. And more importantly, I've been a very active IMA member since 2010. I'm from IMA Coimbatore in Tamil Nadu State Branch. And then I have, thanks to Jailal sir, I had the opportunity to be the Pharmacovigilance Standing Committee Chairman for Tamil Nadu State. And there have been several instances where Jailal sir has encouraged and recognized my involvement in pharmacovigilance. And thanks to him, I'm here today. And I'll go on to the other members. So next is Dr. Usha Rani. She's from Hyderabad. And she is the professor and HOD of Department of Clinical Pharmacology and Therapeutics at Nizam's Institute of Medical Sciences, Hyderabad. You can see the distinguished CV in front of you. For want of time, I would not want to go read everything. So she's a very well-recognized name in the field of clinical research and pharmacovigilance. And a very important point I want to highlight is that she is one of the core training panel members for the Pharmacovigilance Program of India, which is a government program for pharmacovigilance. Next, I would like to introduce Dr. Pooja Sharma, who's Associate Professor and the Head of Research at the Medanta Institute of Education and Research in Gurgaon. And he has a well-recognized CV. She's basically a gynecologist. And but she has moved into the field of research, and she's showing a lot of interest in real-world evidence, which is a field that is coming up very fast. And real-world evidence in the background of pharmacovigilance actually has a lot to provide for the betterment of the healthcare in the future. So that way, she's a very important member. And then we have Dr. Subhrajyoti Bhowmik from Kolkata. So we have people from different parts of India. So he's an MD in pharmacology with more than 13 years of experience. And he has done a lot of work in Johns Hopkins University, USA in the patient safety area. He's an assessor for NABH. And there are several other things that you can see. And currently he's clinical director for quality research and academics at Peerless Hospital and BK Roy Research Center, Kolkata. And then we have Dr. Sundarvel sir, who's a very well-known name in the IMA. And sir is a retired professor of medicine and medical superintendent from government services with more than 20 years of experience. And he has served as dean in charge of, he is currently the dean in charge of St. Peter's Medical College Hospital and Research Institute, Hosur, Tamil Nadu. And he has been an inspector for the Medical Council of India. And I want to specifically thank sir for coordinating with the IMA headquarters and helping us to understand the IMA ways of working. Thank you so much, sir. And then we have Professor Dr. Subramania, who's a professor of pediatrics, Vaidehi Hospital, Institute of Medical Sciences, Bangalore. And sir has a very strong track record in the Indian Academy of Pediatrics. As you can see, he has been in a very, very high positions, and he's a very well-recognized name in the field of pediatrics. And for me, he's very important in the way that he has a very good understanding of pharmacovigilance from a clinician's point of view. And I really wish to thank him for his support to our standing committee. And in fact, this idea of showing the CVs in a slide set is his idea, and I'm very thankful to him for that. And then we have Dr. Sachin Kuchia, who's from Jabalpur, who's professor and head Department of Pharmacology. And he has a very good distinction of being the innovator of the ADR reporting app, which is used by the government of India. And he's coordinator for the ADR monitoring, the Adverse Drug Reaction Monitoring Center in Jabalpur. And he has several credentials and publications to his credit. And he's an MD and DNB in pharmacology. So this is the set of members that we have, apart from the most senior member who's going to be the speaker today. And later, after our national presidents and HSG's address, she will be introduced by Dr. Usharani subsequently. And before moving on to the next thing, I want to quickly share a few ideas that we have that we want to do through this pharmacovigilance standing committee. So from today, we are giving a commitment that we will do a monthly webinar for sure. And today we are starting with clinical trials, and we will continue. We have lined up topics for the next few months as medico-legal aspects of pharmacovigilance, vaccine vigilance, real-world evidence, and the focus of that in pharmacovigilance. We are planning to do one more panel discussion at least every month with other specialty experts, and people from various medical specialties will share their views on challenges they face in the pharmacovigilance space. And then the strengthening of the existing collaboration with the National Pharmacovigilance Program, which is already there in the IMA. We want to actually work with that cell very strongly and want to take it to the next level. And next idea what we have is networking with IMA state and other committees for sensitization of PV. We want to make that as a nationwide activity, which has to, of course, we have the COVID crisis. That is why we are actually doing this on a webinar. But in a way, it is an opportunity because we are getting to reach the entire national level through this. And we have also some novel initiatives like connecting with portals, medical portals like Practo and HealthFlix, which are widely used today. And for that can be, whether that can be used for the reporting of adverse events. That is one concept that we are thinking. And joint training and capability development in pharmacovigilance for all stakeholders. That is something that we are thinking as an ongoing activity, not just events. We are also planning activities which will be done by the members of the committee. And we also want to involve medical students by advocating, sensitizing them towards pharmacovigilance. For that, we would want to work with the IMA medical, with the junior doctors wing, and that we want to actually go in that way. And last but not the least, we want to prepare posters and promotional material in pharmacovigilance, which can be used by any IMA member. So that is something which we want to do. All these are our plans for the rest of the year, sir. And we have many more discussions happening. Probably next webinar, we'll be able to share the next things, sir. So with that, I conclude my introduction note, and I thank IMA headquarters for supporting and organizing this Zoom meeting, sir. So now I request our respected National President, sir, to give his presidential address and also inaugurate this series of webinars, sir.
Thank you, Vijay, and distinguished Indian Medical Association Secretary General, Dr. Jay Lile, the Chairman of the Pharmacovigilance Committee, Dr. Vijay, the state presidents from the various other states. I could see it from Dr. Haryana, Dr. Karan Punia, Maharashtra, Dr. Ramakrishna Lunde is there. The various other state presidents who are present in the particular meeting. Senior leaders of Indian Medical Association participating and actively taking part in this meeting, and the members of the Pharmacovigilance Committee. You could see the Finance Secretary from Telangana, Dr. Gattas is there. And warm welcome and greetings to you all. I know this is a time that every one of us is much stressed out and stressed with the COVID pandemic and a lot of issues which are facing with the COVID at this point. And I'm so happy that at least at this moment, you are starting a webinar on pharmacovigilance topics. Though our dream when we started the Pharmacovigilance Committee to have a quick start. It took nearly 4 months for the pharmacovigilance to come out and start this first webinar series. So something is better than nothing. So I'm so happy, at least after the 4 months of germination and growing. Today, the pharmacovigilance webinars are initiated. We have started this committee with a lot of expectation and hope, because I know for sure the great commitment Dr. Vijay Venkatraman was showing towards pharmacovigilance, and various international fora and committee which he was representing on this particular topic. And for the Indian pharmacovigilance cell or the committee is also working close to him. So that I wanted to impart that knowledge or the enthusiasm on the pharmacovigilance among our medical practitioners, because most of the time, though there is a pharmacovigilance cell is there, because it's a government body, they have a very big office. But what is really happening in the rural level, what is happening in the general practice level, what is happening even in the medical college, and except the pharmacology people and the probably some medical people, most of that knowledge or the awareness and the need for that has not reached to the people. It has not able to get an elicit and response in the society, that when the doctor is getting some of the issues with the drug, they are not able to get right to or get it reported, or rather we are be able to collect that reports for a concrete action. Somewhere something which is very much we are lacking on that, percolating this vision and objective of the pharmacovigilance. It is not something to see only the adverse events, but it is also a lot of events on that, what we are giving in additional benefits, what we are getting additional efforts, what we are getting additional inputs on the medical therapeutic value, what we are getting. So all this report has to be come and analyzed, especially in the vaccine now era, where we are still depending upon the adverse effects of the vaccine. And is it really we are able to find out a protocol-based pharmacovigilance report on the adverse effects? I'm sure it too we see we will be able to very confidently say what it is happening. And on the society level, we are seeing a lot of spurious drugs and a lot of drugs with unproven quality and the things coming in large number. I mean, last week I read a report which is happening in MP, Madhya Pradesh. There is people who had a remdesivir. They proved 90% of the people who died were given with a spurious remdesivir. There are large number of drugs are now coming into the market in a spurious way. Even recently in Tamil Nadu, there is one doctor was arrested because in that center there is a doctor, our own colleague, has died because of a fake remdesivir which was injected to him. So that is one area. This pharmacovigilance only when this awareness, something when a drug is we are giving, if there is a color change, if there is something is happening with the drug, we could have avoided so much of death which is happening. But nothing will be come into the report. If you ask the central government or if you ask the pharmacovigilance committee, they will have no report. They will say nobody is reporting. But the press is getting a report, and everywhere you are getting a report. There is such a kind of a drug anomaly is taking place. The interaction, the quality of the drug is not there. But I started this pharmacovigilance where we will be able to stand firm and say something very effectively. I would have been happy if the pharmacovigilance committee has sent a report to me that spurious drugs are there and how to find out and how do you identify the drug and how to go ahead and when you to report that. It is not just organizing a seminar or organizing a webinar. That is one, I mean, among a lot of standing committees which you have formed, this pharmacovigilance committee has only the experts. Those who have real knowledge and those who are working in pharmacovigilance, pharmacology, or a medical field only were included with an hope and proactively we should get some kind of stand where then only we'll be able to statistically stand at the ground and what to do and how to go ahead on that. What are the things we'll be able to streamline. Having said that, that is another way. Now, if you see the medico-legal cases which are happening in the country, there are certain cases where it is a doctor might have done everything good, but the death and the lot of complication would have been done due to the fake drug or the complication which is arising because of the drug. There are various incidents. Sometimes there are 3-4 cases we have in the court where the oxygen and nitrous and oxygen was misused. And if there is a drug is coming in a nitrous oxide is put on an oxygen cylinder, and poor anesthetists will not be able to differentiate that. And we should come out with a protocol based on how you are going to make out if there is something is happening, that what is the pharmacovigilance stand on that. It is not only our aim is to report on what is happening as after effect, it is equally important that we need to report, equip and empower our people to so that they will not land up in trouble. They will not be land up in a problem. So that responsibility also I am requesting the Pharmacovigilance Committee to come forward and take. And finally, I must ask, I am interested basically for a research and research protocols, research modules. Every one of you, I could see from your CV, you all are good researchers. But I want the research to come from Indian Medical Association name. It is not or the name of Pharmacovigilance Committee of Indian Medical Association. In the title, when you are presenting a research paper, if you are presenting you as a professor of particular college, that is fine. That is a credit goes to the particular college. But incorporating you as a research committee or a pharmacovigilance committee, if the report coming in the name of Dr. Professor Subramaniam sir, if he has a name, there is a pharmacovigilance committee of Indian Medical Association. The IMA gets that favor. I could see Dr. Sundravel is a professor, retired professor of medicine, and he can publish papers. He can give dissertation topic to the students when he's a PG students on to do something on the pharmacovigilance. So everything, something which we should now, all this research protocol, research orientation has to come. And IMA should also, the name of the IMA should be also there. Then only it will become a visible. It is, I always say, whatever the good works you are doing, it must be palpable and it must be visible. Not only visible, it must be palpable also. So to that level to do, there is a long way to do and work. Very hard work you have to put in. IMA headquarters is willing to support to any extent, whatever the help you need, then we are ready to do that. But I mean, I just want to again remind, one of the committee we have is a hypertension committee. They are continuously doing 31 webinars on hypertension. And each hypertension seminar is attended by nearly 200 people. Because such a eminent speakers they are bringing, and it is not an easy job. 31 days continuously doing seminar in this May month is for a measurement of the hypertension, and they are doing that work. That's all innovation which is coming from the standing committee members. Myself and HSD will give complete autonomy for you. We don't think of it only when if you are looking for somebody's path in which you want to go, or if there is a track must be there, you must go, then you will be only a follower. You are not a leader. You must create your own steps should be created. You should find a path. You must find a track, and you must explore that how to go ahead. And that is what we are expecting. And that is a perception or the vision with which these standing committees are created. Ultimate is in the name of Indian Medical Association with an overall objective to the Indian Medical Association. Whatever you are trying to do, and we are giving for in all permissions, and whatever the help you need, IMA is willing to do. I am not interested in any personal benefit to anyone, but it should be overall for an IMA as a pharmacovigilance committee should come forward. People should know IMA is doing something on the pharmacovigilance. Mumbai should know that is there. You are given a page in the website. You can put your articles. You can put your views. You can put your thoughts. You can conduct something which is will be able to route the medical students. I am happy Vijay was able to say that he is going to contact the medical students. Yes, that is the most important thing you are going to do. And you can do in such a webinars you can do. But something more also concrete it has to come. So I am sure that all of learned colleagues will live up to that expectation and do much more for our IMA and especially on this pharmacovigilance field. Thank you very much for inviting me to be with you. I will not be able to be with you fully, but I'll be there for a few minutes and listen to you. Thank you very much for this opportunity. All the best for your programs.
Thank you so much, sir. We have taken your points very seriously, and we will definitely keep up the confidence that you have on us, and we will definitely work on all these aspects, sir. So next, I request our respected Honorary Secretary General Dr. Jayesh Lele sir to say a few words.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Vijay, respected National President, Professor Dr. Jayadal sir, Dr. Vijay, all the committee members for the Standing Committee for Pharmacovigilance, and of course my teacher, Dr. Nilima Chirsagar from KM Hospital. I still remember those KM days when she used to take tutorials and lectures for us. And today she is the first speaker for this program. I am very happy. This pharmacovigilance subject is a very different kind of a subject and very new subject. Lot of issues are there, lot of things are there. We day in and out, as our national president mentioned about the spurious drugs, vaccine issues, like whether the third phase is trials have been done, second phase trials have been done, what is the immunity level, how much it will work. So, and all the trials, of course, we will have to learn and go about it very fast. We'll have to take up this matter, and definitely this committee, I'm sure, will do a lot of say good seminars, good in educative seminars for the our members, which will help them to find out about this various pharmacovigilance subjects. Wherein the very important one of the thing is that whether the allergic reaction takes place, they are not reported. In fact, in our office also, we have kept one person dedicated for the pharmacovigilance so that he can collect all the data, he can analyze the data, and if required, will submit it to the government. So we can take his help for a lot of activity of the pharmacovigilance. Second thing, I would request you to put it all your activities, webinars, seminars on the our website. One particular page has been given to the every wing and the subcommittee, so that anybody who is visiting the website will come to know that this activity is going on. So I would request Dr. Vijay to take the this your logging ID and details from the our IT person. If it is difficult, I will talk to the IT person and give it to you. We would like to have more programs, as our NP has mentioned, and full cooperation from the IMA headquarters will be given to you. And definitely the activities, the research, as he mentioned, and in fact, a lot of our students, we have the junior doctors network as well as the medical student network. These two wings, they would be much more interested to do this research activity. And of course, the seniors would be interested to understand the functioning and this medicine more, because pharmacology we have learned some 20-30 years back. Subsequently, whenever any new product comes up, we just read that product, but the details what we used to learn in the while in the second MBBS learning pharmacology, that much details we are not learning here. That definitely would be helpful by your committee, as I understand, and various types of discussion, panel discussions would help us to understand this activity. So the best wishes from me to the entire committee. And thank you, Dr. Chirsagar, Madam, for accepting this first talk. And your project also is there in our mind. Because of this COVID, little bit stagnation has occurred. Our office is under lockout. Myself is stuck in Mumbai. National President is there in his hometown. And right now, we are just working to the bare minimum. But once the office grows out, we will work on your project, and we will see that the project is live, and this thing is available to all our members. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to talk to you. Best wishes from me and HSG and IMA headquarters. All the support will be given to you whenever you ask for it. Thank you so much. Over to
Thanks.
Dr. Vijay.
Thank you so much, sir. I have taken your points also very meticulously, and we will definitely reach out to you for any help required, sir. But I'm sure your office is already very much supportive, and we will start working on all these areas immediately, sir. So with that, let me now request Dr. Usha Rani to introduce our speaker for the day, Nilima Chirsagar, ma'am.
Thank you, Vijay, and good afternoon, everyone. And can project the slide, Vijay.
One more.
Yeah.
Just one moment.
Yeah, sure.
Can you see the slide?
Yes. Thank you. And it's a privilege for me to introduce Dr. Nilima Shirsagar, who's been a teacher, a mentor, a guide, and of course a friend to most of us here. She's an MD in pharmacology, a DNB in clinical pharmacology, and also a PhD in pharmacology. She also holds the degrees like FNAS, FNAMS, FRCP from UK, and FACCP from the US. And next slide. She's been a recipient of many national, international awards, most notable of which are the Nathaniel T. Quaid Memorial Distinguished Service Award from the American College of Clinical Pharmacology. She's also a recipient of the prestigious B.C. Roy National Award. She's received the Vasvik Award for Industrial Research and also the Mayor of Mumbai's award, naming a few of them. She's been chairperson for various scientific advisory groups like the Basic Medical Science Division and also the member of the Scientific Advisory Group. She's been the former chair, national chair for clinical pharmacology in ICMR, and we are very happy to be associated with Madam under the Product Development Center of ICMR under her guidance. She's been an emeritus scientist, and she's also been a chairperson and member of various committees like the WHO Committee for Product Development, the Advisory Committee for the Society for Medicinal Products. She's also been a member of the WHO Malaria Policy Advisory Group, and she contributed extensively to the SIOMS committee by developing standards for education and training of healthcare professionals involved in medicine development. And she's also been the Secretary General of the IUPACR, that is the IUFAR Clinical Division, which is the International Union of Basic and Clinical Pharmacologists. And she's been a member of a lot of committees like the famous Drug Technical Advisory Board. She's been the chairperson of the core training panel of Pharmacovigilance Program of India, and we've been very fortunate to be associated with her in this training program, where she's in fact helped us in developing a lot of SOPs for pharmacovigilance reporting and teaching and training. She's the co-chairperson of the National Essential Medicines Committee. And she's also been the chairperson of the subcommittee for Drug Technical Advisory Committee for Fixed Dose Combinations, and her contribution to the irrational combinations has been actually very extensive, and she's done a lot of work on just having the rational fixed dose combinations. And Madam has been not only a great administrator, she's been a great teacher and a great clinician. She was instrumental in setting up the therapeutic drug monitoring OPD with the neurology department, which helped a large number of patients in better control of epilepsy in KEM, which was again continued by Dr. Urmila Thatte and now Dr. Nitya. She set up the malaria OPD, contributing to malaria management and policy for treating malaria. He was instrumental in developing the liposomal amphotericin B for systemic fungal infections and Kala-Azar patients, and now this is the most important drug to be used in mucormycosis presently. And she's currently a member of the WHO Malaria Policy Advisory Group. And she has been, her contribution to pharmacovigilance is phenomenal. She set up the Pharmacovigilance Center, which was recognized as the WHO Special Center, and this has contributed to the development of the Pharmacovigilance Program of India. She's been a member of WHO Committee for Safety Monitoring of Medicinal Products. And then she's been also as a researcher, she has extensive experience and expertise in conducting all phases of clinical trials, pharmacovigilance, phytopharmaceuticals, drugs and vaccine development, drug delivery systems, infectious disease, tropical diseases, especially malaria, regulatory science, and of course, education, where she's a teacher and a trainer for MD, PhD, DNB, DM students, and also MSc in pharmacology, apart from undergraduate teaching and training. And Madam has extensive publications. She has more than 200 publications to her credit. And we are very, very fortunate to have you, Madam, today in this inaugural program for the IMA. And thank you very much for sparing your valuable time. And over to you, Vijay. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. So now I request, I take the honor of actually inviting Dr. Neelima Kshirsagar ma'am to give her talk on the role of clinical trials in assuring the safety of medicines.
Thank you very much, Vijay, and thank you very much for IMA and Dr. Jailal, Dr. Vijay, Dr. Lele, for inviting me here for this very first talk on the pharmacovigilance program that IMA under your leadership, Vijay, is being organized. And I can see that you have a very fantastic IMA audience here. They are very observant, very cryptic. I apologize for the long introduction. You see, Usha Rani Pingle is a very good friend of mine, and she refused to shorten it into one slide. Really, apologies for that. But I assure you, my talk is not going to be very long. But I tried to do justice to the topic which Vijay has so nicely thought about as the first introductory one. If I may share my screen now, I will come up with the slides here. Let me just see if I can do that. Technology is something which is a bit difficult. There we go. So we have here now my presentation, and I will start here from the beginning. Can I do it yet? So the topic which Vijay has very nicely thought for me is clinical trials in assuring the safety of medicine. And I'm very, very happy to be part of the IMA Standing Committee on Pharmacovigilance. And let me see what I have to say. My outline of my talk is why bother to monitor medicine safety in clinical trials, first of all. What is the use of this, what I'm going to say to the prescriber, to you? Is it a regulatory requirement? Do you really need to monitor safety in clinical trials? What should we watch out? And finally, I will say what is the take-home message that I have for you. I need not repeat this. First, do no harm is our dictum, primum non nocere. Pharmacovigilance, as defined by WHO, that's drug safety, is adverse effects with pharmaceutical products. And what is pharmacovigilance? Involving all of the following. It involves collecting data on drug safety, detecting adverse reaction, assess them, as a President Dr. Jailal has mentioned, monitor them, and finally, at the end of it all, to be able to prevent it. That's going to be what we would like to do. Now, if you look at monitoring, assessing, preventing drug safety, that occurs throughout the drug life cycle. So pharmacovigilance from drug safety starts literally at pre-discovery, before the drug discovery thinking. So molecules which are known to be toxic, the researcher won't put that into the stream. So it goes through the preclinical animal toxicology, then to clinical trial, then finally marketing and post-marketing surveillance. What Dr. Jailal and Dr. Vijay and Dr. Lele pointed out was, what do you see in post-marketing and what you should be doing? But I want to emphasize that Dr. Vijay has very, very correctly put as the first talk clinical trials, because that's where you have all the basics on which you should be doing the post-marketing surveillance or your key observations as prescribers. Okay. Now, already Dr. Usha Pingle has mentioned about the liposomal amphotericin that we developed for mucormycosis. Now, we developed it 20, 30 years back, and it's now again in news for mucormycosis, which seem to be taking us all by storm. So I thought nothing like giving this as an example of how we monitored drug safety through the clinical trial that we did with this liposomal amphotericin. Okay, this is what the marketed product looks like. And if you look carefully at the bottom, it says that developed by KM Hospital in collaboration with Delhi University. And we did this with funding from Department of Biotechnology, Government of India. Here's late Dr. Bachawat with Dr. Gregoriadis. Okay, why did we pick up at that time amphotericin? Because there was already this increase in systemic fungal infection. As you will remember, even 20 years back, we were already talking about diabetes, organ transplantation, which all will result in reduced immunity and therefore increasing in systemic fungal infection. Now, amphotericin, a lot of toxicology data was already available from animals, because this is an already marketed drug. All these mutagenicity, carcinogenicity, the works of it, all of it was available. It is used in clinical. It was used in clinic already, amphotericin, effective drug for systemic fungal infection, but it had problems. It had to be given intravenously for long time, 4 to 6 hours. It produced severe fever and rigors, even when pre-treated with paracetamol and hydrocortisone, and it produced lots of kidney toxicity. In fact, to the extent that amphotericin was being called as amphoterrible. It was so bad for the patient. So we thought that, along with Dr. Bachawat, that why not put it in liposome and target it to where the infection is so that you can avoid toxicity to the kidneys. Now, here is what our animal data showed. If you look at this slide, you know, the last but one row and the row above it, if you see the last row and the one above it, toxicity is considerably reduced by the liposomal one. So LD50, as we call for animal toxicity data, it is reduced 1/10 toxicity, while the efficacy is improved 7 times. Why does this happen? Because if you can see in infected animals, in the kidney, the plain amphotericin goes 35, while the liposome goes 8. And in the lung, where the aspergillus infection is, you get much more concentrated. So all very fine. That told us that very good chance that this drug will be much better than amphotericin. But we all know that animals are quite different from humans. And therefore, there is a need for safety monitoring in clinical trial. Primer non-nausea. First thing to see that it is safe. So there are 4 phases of new drug development. I don't have to repeat it. Everybody in the whole country now knows the 4 phases of clinical trials. Still, phase 1, first time, usually in healthy. In this case, if the drugs are toxic, then you don't take it to healthy, but you take it directly to the patient who is suffering from the disease. Then phase 2, you assess what dose is likely to be effective, but say phase 3, you compare with the standard, and phase 4, after the marketing approval is given in diverse population. Okay, so we started making this liposomal amphotericin in our own hospital in Mumbai, and you can see here the condition under which it was being made. And this is what we can call as our homemade liposomal amphotericin. Now we had to start giving it to the patient. Can we start giving it right away to hundreds of patients? No, we were very scared. So in the first patient, and you can see it's exactly 30 years back nearly, we gave it to our first patient. Now here was this drug made in our own laboratory, and now we wanted to give it to intravenously to the patient. Quite scared that we were. So we put the patient in the unit. He was already a systemic fungal infection patient requiring amphotericin. Put him in the intensive unit with 20 intensivists standing around, and here our IV injection started to be given. After a few minutes, patient said he's getting chest pain. My gosh, I think my heart stopped beating when I heard the patient say that. So we took his ECG. ECG looked normal. So we stopped the infusion for some time, and ECG still looked normal. So we slowly continued the infusion. Nothing happened, but the patient was uncomfortable. Then after the 2 days, we had to give the second dose. Now there was no place in the intensive care unit, so we had to take him down to the step down unit. Now what happened? All the intensivists had disappeared because they were busy with other patients. So now it was only this patient, myself, and one of my colleagues, and we were giving. Now the patient never complained of chest pain or anything. So we realized that the effect of chest pain was not because of the drug, but because of so many intensivists and the ICU atmosphere. So when you are monitoring side effects of drug, you need to always know whether it is due to drug or due to something else. Anyhow, so the patient tolerated the drug very well, and we then went on to phase 2 to dose selection and comparing it with standard. So we gave the drug to children, to patients with renal transplant, even to newborns, and even to patients home, because she refused to come to the hospital. We could even do that, of course, with a nurse and a doctor standing by. And the drug not only for systemic fungal infection, but is effective in patients with Kala-Azar or visceral leishmaniasis. And we went to Patna, and in Patna Medical College, Dr. C.P. Thakur and others, we gave it to Kala-Azar patient also. Now here is the kind of adverse reaction that we got in this clinical trial of phase 3 studies, comparing it with plain amphotericin. I won't go through this slide too much, but you can see with plain amphotericin, even after pre-treatment with paracetamol and with hydrocortisone, such a large number of patients got fever, chills, nausea, vomiting, while even without anything, with the liposomal amphotericin, much less, and that too was much milder than the plain amphotericin. So now what is the use of all this information of safety data in phase 1, 2, 3 study? All this is required for getting a regulatory approval for marketing the drug. So we showed that liposomal amphotericin had significantly less adverse reaction. It was less nephrotoxic, produced much less rise in creatinine, could be safely given to renal transplant patients, could be safely given to newborns, effective in patients even when plain amphotericin was not tolerated or was not effective. So then we had the technology transfer, as you can see on a technology transfer day and so on. Okay. Now, what is the use of all this? You produce it for regulatory approval. How do you know it? How do you know what clinical trial data was as a prescriber? So this, all that is observed in clinical trials has to go into the package insert. So if you can see this, this is the layout of a package insert. You know, the indication, use, dose, administration, dosage form, strength, contraindication, warning and precaution, adverse reaction. The package insert captures all the data collected on drug safety of that particular drug. So that's what is supposed to happen. So what happened with our liposomal amphotericin? If you look up, the package insert says that if serious contraindication, if there is already a serious hypersensitivity reaction to amphotericin, then actually don't give it. But on the other hand, it also says that in our clinical trial, a patient who had quite a lot of bronchospasm with conventional amphotericin, he did not suffer the bronchospasm with the liposomal one. It tells you about the precautions and warnings, that if there is fever and rigor in the patient, then you can slow the rate of infusion. Then if there is renal, hepatic or other parameters, then these should be monitored. The subsequent dosage should be adjusted based on these rise. Then further on, it says if in the newborn, if there is a fall in the packed cell volume, you should give transfusion. These are all our observations in the clinical trial that we had carried out. Then don't mix it with any drug, diluent fluid other than the normal saline for infusion. Then don't give it IV if there is anything wrong with the bottle. That's so. And further on, we also checked, you know, just now we heard of spurious drug. So when the drug was marketed in these are the cities where patients were using this or prescribers were prescribing this. So we had our student to go to all these cities, collect the data, some sort of a post-marketing data was being collected to make sure, because as you saw here, in the package insert, if you see the last point, 6.3, post-marketing experience also goes in the package insert, okay? So this is what we did. Now, further on, sometimes clinical trials are done after marketing also for additional indications. Okay. So here are some of the studies we did in cryptococcal meningitis in HIV/AIDS patient, or patient with febrile neutropenia in those who are receiving cancer chemotherapy. And then we also wrote to the editor saying that you should promote such drugs so that they are less expensive. We also treated patient with post-Kala-Azar dermal leishmaniasis and showed that it benefited. I'll skip these three sides. Just shows what all needs to go on to the package insert. Okay. Now, if it is so important that the safety data captured in clinical trial is required for regulatory approval to give marketing approval, and it has to go on the package insert, which are all legally required documents, then obviously there are going to be regulatory requirement as to how you do safety monitoring in clinical trial. You can't just do at your own will, howsoever you wish, but there are requirements. So what is required? Right in the protocol, you have to mention about the adverse event. That is, the protocol should say that how you're going to describe, and you might say the expected. What do you expect to begin with? After phase 1, phase 2, you have some idea. So your phase 3 protocol should say what you expect from the drug. And then from that, you come to know what is unexpected. I should say also how to evaluate the adverse event. Okay. Now I'm going to skip these 1 or 2 slides. I think all of you know adverse event is whether it is not considered truly drug related. Adverse drug reaction is when you have a reasonable possibility of a causal relation. We all wonder what is after you say how to check for causality, certain, probable, possible, unlikely, and it depends on whether it is properly temporally, that it comes after the drug. Could it be due to disease? Is it reappeared after you re-challenge? Did it disappear when you stop the drug? So these are all the ways by which you can assess causality. Then this is how a serious adverse event is described. Results in death, life-threatening, prolongation of hospitalization, disability, and malformation cancer. Now, crucially important, particularly in clinical trials, is how do you elicit the ADR? If you just ask the patient, क्यों ठीक है ना, सब अच्छा तो है ना, कुछ तकलीफ तो नहीं है ना, then 16% of them will say spontaneously, हाँ कुछ तकलीफ हो रहा है. But if you specifically say that क्यों सरवर दुखा नहीं है ना, क्यों पैर वैर नहीं दुखे ना, कोई ठंडी वंडी तो नहीं लगी ना, ऐसा मोर इंक्वायरी किया तो 24% में से हो. This is result of a study I'm saying. But if you have a checklist, did you get headache? Tick. Did you get dry gut? Tick. Did you get this? So if you have a checklist, then large number of people will report. So therefore, in the protocol and in the report, you must look for what is the method of eliciting this adverse event. Okay? So there is also how to report this. The regulations require how to report clinical trials, how to report the adverse reaction, adverse drug reaction that occur in clinical trials. You must report all the serious adverse event, whether they are expected or unexpected. Unexpected adverse event, whether serious or not, must be reported, and phase 3 study must give comparison with the standard. And these are all the things that you have to report, as I mentioned earlier. Now, what happens, that these are some of the problems that can occur, that people don't report. You have to be watchful. So to the regulatory thing for approval, they'll put in. But then when they publish a report, they don't put everything. In one such analysis, they found that while the regulatory reporting, they had done 1,600 serious adverse events, 694 of these were not mentioned in the publication. So you have to be watchful of these critical things when you are looking at the reports of clinical trials. and also when you're looking at the package insert. Okay, and now there are some other rules also which people have to follow. The most important thing is that if there is a death or if there is a serious adverse event, then it has to be in a very short time of 24 hours, full report in 14 days, and if there is a financial compensation, the ethics committee has to give in 30 days and the committee 60 days time. All know this kind of media attention related. Madras High Court sent a notice to the center and to Serum Institute after the Covishield trial. Candidates say they got side effect. Some Chennai-based businessman said he has severe side effect. We remember somebody said he'll get loss of memory. Now these things come in media very quickly, but it takes 2 months for the expert committee to see it. That's where the gap is, and we need to see as to when a media report gives what happens in that follow-up, because we don't always can't say that this is drug related, and it may or may not be. Now, how it is drug related or not, how to give compensation. If it is due to investigational product, compensation is required. If protocol is violated, if you don't provide standard of care, and if there is a child in utero, then compensation is deemed necessary. Okay. There are further some shortcomings of a safety monitoring in a clinical trial. Okay. What are these? Number one, as you saw in the earlier slide, maximum of 2,000 to 3,000 patients are incorporated in the phase 1. Now, this is how frequency of adverse reaction is defined. So, if it occurs in 1 to 9,000, 1 per 1,000 or 9 per 1,000 subject get it, then you will be able to see it in that 3,000 patient that you do in the clinical trial. So, very common you'll definitely see, because this is 1 in 10. Common 1 in 100 also you'll see. Uncommon also you'll mostly see. But rare and very rare, you will not see it in this clinical trial. That is where what your president, Dr. Jailal mentioned, what Dr. Lele mentioned, Dr. Vijay mentioned. This is what you have to be watchful for. The rare and the very rare effect that can happen, which are not seen in clinical trials. So if you look at, the cerebrovenous thrombosis, this is some data which is from international. So COVID patients themselves will get these cerebrovenous thrombosis. They are 40 per million, very rare. Pfizer, they say 4, very rare. AstraZeneca, 10, of course, flu, you don't get it. So these are the ones which need to be captured. And it is you prescribers who can help in documenting this, finding out if there are risk factors, and you have very, very good clinical sense. You can contribute a huge lot to the safety of medicines, really. Now, why further there can be an increase of risk after the clinical trial data? Population varies. There's genetic variation, age, comorbidities, differences in diet, real life medicine use. You might tell the patient take it 3 times a day for 10 days. He might take it once a day for 40 days or vice versa, so on. Or off-label use. Sometimes you find that a drug may be effective in something and you may give it on which there is no data. Publications can be insufficient. They don't mention the method used and the severity, how grading is done. So these are also some shortcomings of safety monitoring in clinical trial. So what is my take-home message? Number one, clinical trials are very important and essential for assuring the safety of medicine. A detailed systematic monitoring is done in clinical trials. The data generated is summarized in the package insert. Okay. It is a regulatory requirement. But there are some shortcomings to limited number of patients and variation in real life incomplete reporting. And so the prescriber has to have this cautious to note that what the safety data of clinical trial tells you at before marketing and what are its limitations. So just because a drug is marketed doesn't mean everything about it is known. These are the limitations. And last but not the least, the most important final message is do make sure that you contribute to the post-marketing adverse reaction monitoring and 2 AEFI adverse event following immunization reporting. And thanks once again to IMA for giving me this opportunity to share my some thoughts. And thank you all listeners to be here with us. Thank you so very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the exhaustive presentation, ma'am. And I really want to highlight the fact that you have not gone by a template presentation, but you have spoken from your experience, which means a lot to us, because we always are more comfortable when something is narrated as a story rather than simply explained as a science. I think you brought together the story and the science in a very parallel manner, and I think it was very, very appealing. And even though for people who have been in the field like me, even for us, we have learned a lot. I am sure for people who are more into patient care, they will have a lot of learning from this session. Thank you so much, ma'am. We have a few questions, and I will read out some of the questions which are relevant. So, first question from Dr. Subramania sir: is it possible to print on the vial or the strip or package if there is any area to report to so and so, rather than relying on the link reports? I mean, I think sir is saying that whether we should have that on the strip instead of looking at media reports. So I think that is the question.
Sorry, can you repeat the question? Your audio was a bit unclear.
Sorry, ma'am. Actually, what he's asking is it possible to print on the vial or the strip or package that where they can, how they can report the ADR? Can it be printed on the label itself is what he's asking.
Yeah. That's a very good thought and good suggestion. I think already a lot of things are on the bottle, and the other problem is, doctor, that the bottle goes to the patient. It is not, that doesn't come to the prescriber. So while it's a great suggestion, and we'll definitely put it to the PBPI committee and so on, you're absolutely right. One of the ways of how to disseminate to all the prescribers that you can report your ADR to so and so. Now there are 200 and odd ADR monitoring centers all over in the country, sir. And the thing to do actually is to report to them. Just tell them that this is what happened, and they'll collect all the information, fill the form for you, and do all that. But sometimes somewhere there is a gap in communication and letting everybody know about it. But I think here IMA can play a big role in seeing as to how this information is frequently disseminated to prescribers. Yes, sure. Thank you for that suggestion.
Thanks, ma'am. And next question is, what are your views on under-reporting of ADRs in India? Do you think HCP should be playing a major role in resolving it, or the regulatory authorities?
You're absolutely right. The only solace, if any, may be under-reporting of ADR is a global problem, not just in India. Maybe in India it must be much less. This less than 1% of the actual ADR get reported. Often, often the question is what to report is a question, okay? And this is a bit difficult to define, but the way it has been very successfully is anything that bothers you should be reported. Like, for example, if somebody is taking aspirin and he says he's got gastritis, you will say, okay, fine, you will be all right, take some, do whatever. But then if you find that normally the low dose aspirin doesn't cause into anybody, and suddenly you find that somebody gets a big bleed, or 100 patient in your thing, everybody is getting it, which is very much dramatic, more than usual, or something which is happening in too many patients, these all will bother you. Beside, of course, something which you don't expect, unexpected. If it is serious, then these are the ones to actually report. That is the way, because most of the people don't report because they don't know what to report. Other thing is that there is always a concern that कोई लीगल एक्शन तो नहीं होगा, ऐसा कोई तो नहीं कहेगा कि मैंने कुछ मेरे से कुछ गलती हो गई तो इसके वजह से पेशेंट को साइड इफेक्ट हो गया. So ऐसा थोड़ा people are a bit concerned about that. However, it is said that when you report an ADR, there is not supposed to be, it is supposed to be completely kept confidential, and there is no kind of a legal thing. And that part falls more into medication error, and that gets taken up in a very different way altogether.
Thank you, ma'am. And another question which is related is that how can prescribers be motivated to report common ADRs outside clinical trials? Often they say, since common ADRs are known, why should we report?
Yeah, no, that is true. See, most of the time, if you're using drugs which have been available for a long time, and you know most of the ADR that happen, then you don't have to report them. But if they bother you, if you suddenly get somebody who grows a horn, as we give as an example, then you know that you won't expect a horn to happen. So that is that is the way. So you don't have to report common ADRs because that will unnecessarily flood the system. But what we need to know is something that bothers you, as I said, and clearly here the risk factors. What is the risk factor? The idea is to be able to prevent. Excuse me.
Thanks, ma'am. And another related question, do ADRs due to off-label use, do they have legal implications?
Yeah. So, the off-label use is a bit tricky situation. But what is said for the off-label use is that it is off-label use means what? That the company is not responsible for it. They don't say that you use the drug in this indication, but you as a physician find that in a particular patient, this drug is likely to be effective. Okay. And because the other available options of treatment may not benefit him or maybe not good enough for him, so you want to try this. And this is a very standard thing in pediatric practice because half the drugs are such on which there is no label only on it. So that's the off-label use. So here, supposing an adverse reaction happens, what is the legal implication? See, here you ought to have prescribed it, one, in good faith. Second is your peers should sort of agree that yes, what you have done is in the best interest of the patient. Now, if he gets a side effect, side effects will happen. It's not that we can prevent every adverse reaction. So that is the legal situation there. Okay.
Thank you, ma'am. And then the next question is again, I mean, we all know the answer, but if it comes from your experience, like how you handle the presentation, it will be very, I believe the answer will be slightly different and more informative. Like the question is, how can clinicians be motivated to make the additional efforts towards reporting?
Yeah, correct. So, reporting any adverse reaction, if you see, it is really considered as one of the duties. If you look at the erstwhile MCI and now the National Medical Commission, you see the ethical behavior of a professional doctor, then reporting ADR and reporting, carrying out your professional duties is one of your professional duty really, because you're contributing to the global knowledge base, and that helps your patients in the final run, because then you can understand why this happened in this fellow. By just one patient you know, but when their data comes from 100 patients, then you come to know. Like even the cerebrovenous thrombosis, we are still collecting the data. Only when full data comes out, then we'll know, is it happening more in women? Is it happening those who are taking contraceptives? Is it happening in those who already have some other comorbid? That whole collective wisdom will happen only by contribution of intelligent prescribers and who are astutely observing their patients. So both ways, you have all the reason to report.
Thank you, ma'am. And another question from a very direct, what do you call from a frontline medical practitioner for doing a pharmacovigilance study related to COVID drugs? Do we need the approval of ethical committee or waiver is there as it is a pandemic?
Yeah. So, ethics committee approval. Okay. So there are different ways of studying things. When we say clinical research, we group them into two. One is observational and the other is interventional. Okay. Intervention means you are doing something to the patient and then observing. Observational study means the patient is already taking his treatment, doing whatever he has to do, and you're only observing and seeing what happens to him. So when you're only observing what is happening to the patient, the risk to the patient is minimum. The only risk to the patient may be that you take his time when you ask him something or you jot down. So to that extent, his privacy is to that extent, sort of invaded into. So, but nevertheless, ethics committee approval has to be taken. The moment you say that this is a study, observational or interventional. In interventional, the ethics committee would have many more questions. Are you denying him the standard of care? What is the risk of what intervention you're giving? What are your patients? Are they protected? Do they have insurance? Blah, 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 all that. If it's only observational, they will more quickly give you approval. What about pharmacovigilance? No ethics committee approval is required because reporting is part of your duty. What is part of your duty doesn't require ethics committee approval. Public health person who investigates an epidemic, it is part of his duty to investigate an epidemic. It does not require ethics. So there is a clear distinction between research and your duty. And there are some very good SIOMS guidelines which define these things. Okay, I hope the point is clear.
Yeah.
Okay, but then, the responsibility of keeping the confidentiality rests with the person who transmits this. Every step who transmits it forward has the responsibility of confidentiality of the data.
Thank you so much, ma'am. And another question, it's a slightly different one on the operational aspect of the pharmacovigilance program of India. Is there any adverse event monitoring center set up in rural areas and villages of India? How should someone from remote and underdeveloped areas, mainly illiterate, how can they report adverse events?
That's a bit tricky question, really. We do have more than 200 centers. The attempts are being made to go into as much, district places as possible, and where you would have larger population being able to provide this. There is a toll-free number on which any patient can report. Okay. Any patient can directly call up and report. There's a toll-free number for that. But still, I would agree with you that the information on this is not yet that fully known. For example, when I went to take my own vaccine, I was given one sheet of paper, I remember, where there was a number. If you get any ADR, etc., you please call up this number, okay? And but later on, a few of my friends will say, "Humko koi paper parchi varchi nahi diya." So it is still we are not perfect there yet. That's a point. But surely, if IMA takes it up, and if you have, all the trained 6, 7, 8 lakh doctors reporting, that's something which will be a huge contribution.
Thank you, ma'am. And then we have a few suggestions also. And one question is like, is ethics committee approval required for research on past data?
So past data, which is anonymized, where you're not going to get the name of the person, okay, and you're not going to get back to the person, and this is publicly available data, then you can just ask for an ethics committee waiver, okay. But if it is not a publicly available data, supposing it's records of your own hospital, then you need to have administrative approval.
Thank you, ma'am. And then There are quite a few questions which are more from the back end of pharmacovigilance, like how can we build an understanding from signal detection to signal validation and building a causal relationship? Is past PASS studies, and how effective are they in the context of pandemic and South Asian landscape? It's a quite a complex question.
It will require one seminar. You may keep one seminar, and I'll be happy to contribute on that. Signal detection is a huge area. But thank you for that question. It shows that you really have a very in-depth knowledge about the subject. So I'm sure Vijay will organize one session on that.
Sure, ma'am. We have just started today. So as we move forward with the higher focus topics, we'll definitely be going forward. And I think I have taken all the questions that I have understood. There are a couple of questions which I have not understood, but I've asked for clarification. If we hear back, probably then we can answer. And one question, it's more like a suggestion from again Dr. Subramania sir, is should we need to, is it good to digitize the prescription by clinicians so that the process is subjective and not subjective? And now that many are going for online prescription, should this be made kind of a norm?
Yeah, it's a very good suggestion because then errors because of writing, and I mean I don't have to mention about the handwriting of doctors. It's a matter of hundreds and thousands of jokes. So, but errors because of that, and errors in the dosing and frequency, these all can be avoided. Especially if the digital prescription is based on a software which has a drop down, and so that's a huge way forward, and it hugely helps. So you won't have because there are similar sounding names and so on. But I always think and say that this kind of so-called artificial intelligence, I have no problem with it. But my problem is that in trying to look for artificial intelligence, our real intelligence should not be lost. So we still are treating the patient. We still have to think which drug to give to our patient. So, but the digital thing certainly helps, sure.
Thank you, ma'am. And one question so far, that is the last one. That is again a very fundamental question. Will we benefit by actually making ADR reporting mandatory by physicians rather than voluntary?
So, as there are a few countries only where it is mandatory. Most countries don't have it mandatory, really speaking. Because when you make it anything mandatory, it's very difficult to police and say whether it has been followed. Okay, so that's also a difficulty. And nobody likes anything. In our country, the least, we don't like anything being mandatory. But many countries don't have it mandatory. But what is mandatory is for the pharma company to do a post-marketing PSUR update report. They are mandatorily they have the mandate to put it to the regulatory authority. On that, there is a mandate. But there's no mandate on the prescriber that he must report something.
So thank you, ma'am. And one question which has come now is, again, a very practical question. Is prescription in the name of the generic drug an active solution to minimize medicine error? I mean, they are meaning medication error.
Yeah, so, there has been a lot of pros and cons to this. So when you write a generic drug, you're helping the patient quite a lot. The moment you write a brand name, it increases the cost. We all know that. But the prescribers are a bit worried that when he writes a generic drug, he's not sure about the quality. The drug controller will say that should not be the case because the generic drug is given approval based on its equivalency with another originator's name and drug and so on. So when you write a generic, the critically important thing is when you write a brand name strictly, and we have done a study and we've shown many times you write a brand name, and sorry to say, but you don't know what's in that brand name, honestly. The The companies sometimes keep the same brand name but change the ingredients inside. Okay, they delete something, and we are just now dealing. I'm a chair of the committee that looks at fixed dose combination. Not to mention anything yet about that. So in short, yes, putting a generic name is definitely helpful to the patient, and that's strictly speaking. All government advisories are suggesting that you should prescribe by generic. So yes.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I think that was a really wonderful session. We have come to the end of the session. Most of the questions have been answered, and we are almost nearing 6 o'clock. So I wish to thank you, ma'am, for your time, and it's real. We couldn't have started with any better person or any better topic. Both have come together on this day, and on World International Clinical Trials Day, we are talking about this, and especially when you are speaking, it makes a lot of difference, ma'am. Thank you so much for your participation and support, ma'am. And of course, as both our national president and HSD have mentioned, we have a lot of plans, and we will take your guidance, and we will try to make it even fast and move forward with more vigor, ma'am.
Yeah, I'd just like to announce what Dr. Lele, Dr. Jailas was mentioning. We have through ICMR developed a prescribing skills course, which is online course, which was available, started 2020, made for interns, and a lot of private practitioners also subscribe for it. And so we realized that it is something which appears to be a need, and we thought that it is something very useful, because many of the prescribers, as was mentioned, by Dr. Lele, that we learned something in pharmacology 20 years back, and we really need to know. While you do quite a lot through IMA webinars, there was a great need felt. And under COVID time, having it online was very, very important. So we have this on ICMR online prescribing skills course, which is being launched now in June. While we still don't have it exactly go through IMA because they're working it out, but nevertheless, private practitioners are most welcome to register for this starting from June. The registration is open for 1 month, June through July. And this is a 40 modules with many case studies and some videos on communication and how to administer drug and so on. And then you get a certificate at the end of it. So we are trying to work out though as to whether what kind of credit points people will get with it. But at present, we are still working on it. But it's going to be launched in June. So I'm happy to announce that. We'll soon have a formal launch. Eventually, it will also come on the IMA site and so on when you have your internal discussion about how to go about that. But thank you very much for all of these opportunities.
Thank you, ma'am. Now we have come to the end of the session. I request our member, Dr. Sachin Kuchia, to unmute himself and deliver the vote of thanks.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. So at the outset, I would like to express my thanks to Dr. Vijay Venkatraman, sir, who have given me an opportunity to be in the IMA National Pharmacovigilance Standing Committee. And today was our first webinar, and I was very happy to hear a lot of pharmacovigilance from Dr. Jayesh Lal, which was something very new to me, because I haven't heard so much of pharmacovigilance from a person outside pharmacology. So I feel indebted to Dr. Jayesh Lal, Dr. Jayesh Lele sir, our HSD, Professor Dr. Usharani Pingle madam, and our lead speaker this evening, Professor Dr. Nilma Sagar madam. Madam, I got the opportunity to hear you in 2006 at the Pharmatech, and this is my second time in life. So with your talk, we learned the definition of pharmacovigilance, importance. I remember you people worked through Shankh Pushpi and epilepsy episode also, the discovery of liposomal amphotericin B. And the surprise, today I got to learn a new acronym, SUV. Till now it was cars and bikes. Today it is small unilamellar vesicles. Got to meet the first recipient of liposomal amphotericin B, your journey through the pharmacovigilance. And I must say, madam, you were very brave and lucky both. So today's talk will be helpful for us in present times also. We are lucky to have such an aware audience. So thank you, audience, and for your brilliant questions also. Madam, we look forward to join the ICMR online prescriber course, and I believe every IMA member, every intern will be blessed to be a part of that course. Thank you, sir. Thank you to everybody. Namaskar.
Thank you, Dr. Sachin. And now that we have started off with a very good session today, you can look forward to regular activities from our PV Standing Committee. So you'll get information shortly about the successive events and activities that we are going to do. Thank you all. Bye. Yeah.